All right, red versus blue, number 55. And we sort of moved this edition ahead because of all of the latest things that are happening in Washington. Keith, what do you think?
Mike, you just can't make this stuff up. So the United States is prepared to bomb the Houthis, who are a rebel group occupying Yemen, who have been, for the past several years, assaulting shipping going through the Red Sea, piracy, missile attacks on U.S. ships. They're a proxy for Iran. They've been attacking Israel. And to set up a call so that all of the major government officials are briefed on this, the security advisor, Mike Waltz, sent out a group call on Signal, which is apparently an encrypted but public app that you can put on your iPhone or your Samsung and participate in these calls. And he invited Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor of the Atlantic magazine. No one's really sure why or who was supposed to be there instead of Jeffrey. But nonetheless, he was included on the call, and nobody bothered to ask, who is JG in the little bubble that pops up. On the call was the Vice President of the United States, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, the head of the CIA, the head of National Security, and Presidential Advisor Stephen Miller. During a course of several calls over several days, Hegseth, who appeared to be the guy sort of orchestrating the call, the Secretary of Defense, outlined our timing, our targets, and our strategy to attack Yemen. We attacked them with Tomahawk missiles, with aircraft-launched missiles, with sea-launched missiles. We had very specific targets in mind. He was able to brief the group that, in fact, we identified the head missileer charged with the missile program for the Houthis, walking into the apartment building with his girlfriend, and then we later flattened the building. So we had apparently human intel on the ground in Yemen. We were looking at very specific targets, and all of that was broadcast during the course of the call. Hegseth was fortunate to be in Hawaii, so he was not at yesterday or today's congressional hearings, but Gabbard and John Metcalf were there. Metcalf said it was not a mistake to have a call. Gabbard said it was not classified, meaning I didn't classify it, but Hegseth probably should have classified it. Trump said, Waltz, the national security guy, is a good man. And there was nothing on the call talking about war plans, and there was nothing on the call that was, talking about anything that was classified. Well, the first rule, when a reporter has the transcript of what you said and hasn't released all of it, is don't lie about what's in it, because there's then evidence that basically shows you're a liar. And across the front of the Trump administration, several of their top officials were shown to be not telling the truth when it comes to this.
And this is because they don't like this guy at all. None of these people like this reporter for past stories.
No, they don't. In fact, Jeffrey Goldberg, I think he's an excellent reporter. I read the Atlantic magazine. I get some of the best information on politics from the Atlantic. He chairs the Washington Week with the Atlantic on public television on Friday nights. He has an excellent staff. They put out excellent product, but he's known to be liberal and he's known to be anti-Trump, and Trump knows enough that he doesn't like him. And in fact, the biggest problem for Mike Waltz has not been the fact that he had this call with a reporter on it and leaked national secrets to who knows who. It's that he had Jeffrey Goldblum in his call list, and he's trying to figure out what that was all about, because that makes Waltz suspicious in Trump's mind. They're parsing the words. They said it was not a war plan. It was an attack plan, because attack plan was what Hegseth used in the subject matter for the text. So suffice it to say, they're in a world of trouble. Kara Swisher, who's a noted tech reporter, says every 13-year-old knows how to use Signal. Presumably every foreign intelligence agency knows how to as well. One of the guys was Trump's negotiator. He was in Russia when he was on the call. Tulsi Gabbard was traveling throughout the Southeast Asia, was likely in India when she took the call. So there could have been all chances of being intercepted. But what we see from this are a couple of things. First of all is how the Republicans circled the wagons to defend the indefensible, and how they just basically got up and lied and said things that they know are not true, and they know are not true. George Packer, also a writer in The Atlantic this week, coined the term ritualized humiliation. And that is what is required of everybody who works in the Trump administration, ritualized humiliation, to protect Trump at all costs. And when you do that, you sacrifice your credibility. And credibility is not an infinite resource. When you run out of it, you are pretty useless in politics. And these folks are sacrificing it at a breakneck pace, and they're not going to be able to recover from that. Now, you raised the issue, why do they not like Atlantic? And Mike Waltz in particular, there was a story that appeared recently, a few months ago in the Atlantic, saying the following. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz seemingly could not speak a paragraph without a grovel in the direction of his boss, President Donald Trump. His assessments were those of a courtier praising a king, not the representative of the great republic conducting the affairs of state. And the Atlantic has been pretty clear about holding up a mirror and demonstrating those kinds of things. What's happening is that Trump is reaping the whirlwind of having a mediocre cabinet in all of these offices. I mean, just look at the Department of Defense. We've had this screw up. We've had the Musk briefing on China's war plans that had to be canceled. We had the Enola Gay and references to Jackie Robinson being scrubbed from the DOD website because of concerns over DEI. We're firing generals and admirals willy-nilly and redeploying troops without consultation with our allies. We've indeed traded DEI for DUI when it comes to the Department of Defense. And it's not a reassuring situation for America or its allies.
Yeah, it isn't. And the thing that bothers me the most, and this would apply across the board to Democrats, Republicans, and everybody in politics in this day and age, is that it seems that no one is ever held accountable anymore on either side. I mean, we can point to, I'm sure, some things that happened during the Biden administration that are similar. I don't think is quite as egregious as this, but there are things that come up in every administration over the last 10 or 15 years, and no one ever seems to be accountable for it.
Absolutely. The line of accountability and responsibility, those goalposts have been moved into the next county. People now are getting away with things that people, if they had any decency in politics, would have resigned from a long time ago. 3 or 4 of the people involved in this scandal would have been gone by this time if this were the Nixon or the Ford or the Clinton or the Bush administrations or the Reagan administration. But those standards don't apply anymore. And they don't apply, frankly, because the president's remarks were go out and defend these folks. And as a result, people are tying themselves in knots, saying things that are not credible, not true, not verifiable, and have the country scratching their heads and laughing at them.
And I think what happens, too, is Trump enables them. And so the Democrats think, well, we can pull this same stuff. So it's like a vicious circle. It starts to really rumble in a direction that's not good for the country at all.
It does. And everybody points the finger and said, well, they did it this and they did it that. And it was worse then. So why are you even talking to me about this?
Right.
And it's a perpetual cycle that just drives the standards even lower.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Where do you think this is going to go, Keith?
The Republicans in the Senate have called for an inspector general's investigation. Too bad we just fired all the inspector generals. I expect there's going to be hearings behind closed doors in both the House and the Senate where the questions will be a lot more pointed and the answers will need to be a lot more focused than they were in the public hearings that have been held so far. I expect that Signal will no longer be used by government employees at the senior level. And I expect that you will continue to see Hegseth sort of struggle to maintain any kind of credibility and focus in the administration.
Makes you want to have a drink, doesn't it?
That's what he said.
Okay, well, there's other things that are going on as well. Let's cover those briefly, and then we'll move on.
Well, just to hit the highlights, we had an announced partial agreement between Russia and Ukraine this week. Part of the deal is that the United States will help restore Russian access to the world for agricultural exports, lower maritime infrastructure costs, enhance access to ports and payment systems. We've agreed to that. It remains to be seen if that's going to result in a road to peace. Russian TV has characterized this as a sop to Trump, and it says, and this is a quote, "It bought Donald some pleasure." So from the Russian television perspective, certainly the president is being played in his efforts to impact the Russian-Ukraine situation.
How does this affect our European allies? And I use that term kind of loosely these days.
Well, one of the things that you saw on the text call on Signal was that was the disdain that the vice president showed for our European allies. They are certainly going to take that to heart, and they're already planning their own nuclear shield. They're already planning their own defense plans They're already planning to negotiate in their own economic interests away from the United States. All of the work that the Bush administrations, both of them did to create allies and people willing to throw in with us is being eroded and destroyed rapidly.
It's interesting. There's collateral damage then to this call or this text thread that isn't even tied to the actual situation, right? With the Vance comments and stuff like that towards our European allies.
Very much so. J.D. Vance is the kind of guy who should not speak extemporaneously. If he doesn't have a cue card in front of him, he shouldn't be talking. I think that's the lesson we're learning about his time in public service.
So where do you think the Ukraine-Russian thing is going to go? Or is it's probably too hard to call at this point, right?
It's too early to call, but the Ukrainians have learned as long as they appear to be cooperative and make Russia be the guys who are holding up the peace deal, that's the position that they want to be in. And they seem to be adept enough of doing that. And we'll see if it puts Putin into a corner or whether or not Putin simply leverages Trump and gets more concessions that are ultimately not acceptable to Ukraine. You know, you hate to have your future dependent upon the ego of Donald Trump, but that's where Ukraine is right now.
And I guess the ego of Putin as well.
Well, exactly. That's the case. Now, there's some other things this week, too. Trump has been losing in court on deportations. He invoked the State Secrets Act to avoid providing information to the judge relative to the deportation of Venezuelans. We'll see where that goes. Usha Vance, the wife of the vice president, announced she was going to visit Greenland. And then the vice president said, well, I'll go with her. They're not going to visit Nuuk to celebrate Greenland culture, which was the original announced purpose of the trip. They're going to go 900 miles away to a U.S. airbase, presumably to talk to U.S. Military personnel. 6% of Greenlanders support U.S. taking over Greenland. So that's, I think, 3,000 out of the 5,600 or 5,400 or so, maybe 2,500. So maybe they've got to try and find some of those people, but they're hard to find. They are making Make America Go Away hats, red hats that say Make America Go Away that are being sold in Greenland, which I think speaks to the popularity of the U.S. takeover amongst the Greenlanders.
I do find it funny that there are actually 6,000 people that would like to be part of the United States.
Well, in any given locality, there's always those outliers. And so it's about 6%, according to opinion polls in Greenland. But again, nobody really knows how good the opinion polling is in Greenland because, people are pretty well spread out there.
Absolutely.
And then finally, here's the political news for the week, Mike. There's going to be special elections held April 1st. The most significant one is in Wisconsin for a Supreme Court justice. They elect justices on a partisan basis there. You run against candidates based on partisanship. This will flip the Supreme Court to Democrats, and there's thinking that if the Democrats take control, that this new justice has already made up her mind that she's going to declare the congressional districts that are not supposed to move again until 2032 to be null and void, and that's going to allow the Democratic legislature to gerrymander and pick up 2 or 3 congressional seats. So that's really what the election is about. Elon Musk has spent $20 million on behalf of the Republicans. George Soros and Jay Pritzker have spent about $5 million, and other groups have spent a lot of money on behalf of the Democratic candidate. So this is a big proxy battle in Wisconsin with potentially congressional seats at risk. The fact that you can campaign on a partisan basis on that issue and then be a judge is just gobsmacking to me. But that's how they do it in Wisconsin. And here's a race that nobody's really been watching. But as you know, Mike Waltz, National Security Advisor, had to resign his seat in Florida 6, or Florida 9, I guess, to run. The Republican candidate, Randy Fine, the Democratic candidate, John Weil. Weil, the Democrat, has raised $9 million. Fine, the Republican, has raised about $500,000 and spent most of it. The Democrats are leading in Florida in early voting, although that's a state where a lot of people vote on Election Day. So that may be too early to know. Both Waltz and Trump won the district by 30 points. If Weil has, by chance, wins because it's a very low turnout election, which they always will be in a special like this,
right? Or
the Republican only wins by 6 in a district that was a Trump plus 30, that's a big, big danger sign for the Republicans. So keep an eye on Florida, keep an eye on Wisconsin come Tuesday.
And of course, the latest situation with the Republicans in Washington might have somewhat of an effect on these elections.
Well, no doubt. And the fact that You've got the gang that couldn't shoot straight running national defense and national intelligence. You've got a guy at Commerce who says that, my mother wouldn't miss her Social Security check. Only people who would miss their Social Security check are people who are, trying to game and crooks trying to steal from the system. Well, I know if I didn't get my Social Security check, I'd be pissed. And I know about 50,000 other people in my town who would be more pissed than I was that they didn't get it.
My hand's up, too.
Well, there you go. So I think that it's those kinds of out-of-touch comments that are being made by the Trump administration and credibility destructors that are not helping candidate Fine in Florida.
It's going to be interesting times ahead. We're going to have to watch, especially this signal gate. I don't know if it has risen to the point where we can put gate on the end of it, but we're going to keep an eye on this because I think there's going to be more that is going to happen, as you've pointed out, closed door meetings and things like that. And we'll see what happens.
Well, we will. So stay tuned. And it could rise. And, these things, they sometimes get a life of their own and they continue. There's hearings, there's books, there's, you got a reporter involved. So, there's stories that are going to be coming out periodically. A lot of people have an interest in this. And just to go back on Congress for a minute, Elsie Stefanik, who is named Ambassador to the United Nations, they've not held a vote on her yet so that she can continue to vote in the House because the Republican margin is that close. And in fact, they needed her vote once. There's 2 Democrats who have passed away. We have these 2 open seats in Florida. So there's special elections to go. But if the Waltz seat goes to the Democrat, Elsie Stefanik may not be going to the United Nations.
Wow. Lots going on. Stick with us. We thought we'd be done when the election was over, but we've decided to carry on. And we're having a good time doing it. So please like our Facebook page. Come visit us there. Give us a good review on Spotify and iTunes and wherever you get your podcast. And we will see you again next week or thereabouts for another edition of Red versus Blue.
Bye, everybody. Stay strong.